Can you start by telling us your name and your rank in Trinity House?
Chris Foulds is the name. AK.
Right, when were you born?
Well, let's see, that's good. 1942, 28th of June 1942.
And how long have you been a lighthouse keeper?
Well, I joined Trinity 1971. Yeah, December 71. Came straight from the Navy. I'd done my 9 years in the Navy, more or less straight into Trinity House. And when I clocked in, first place I came was Holyhead Depot. Edgar Lewis said, I said to him, I suppose I'll be under training here for a bit, will I? And Edgar Lewis said, no. He says, we'll have you off down to a lighthouse. He says, we'll have you down to South Stack tomorrow. So the next day I went down to South Stack Lighthouse with all my bedding and food and things like that. Knocked on the door, and first keeper I met was Bob Farrer. He opened the door to me. He says, come on in, have a cup of tea. He says, the boss is in bed at the moment, he'll see you in a bit. So I went in, we sat down, had a chat. I thought, this is all pretty good. But I was thinking, what's this character, the keeper in charge, going to be like? And who comes out? Half an hour later, Bill O'Brien. And I thought, well, we should be all right here, yeah. So we all settled down then and had a good old chat for another hour or so. And that was me. I thought, yeah, I could take to this life. It'd probably be all right. So I did about 3 weeks down there at South Stack. 3 weeks, yeah, over the Christmas with Tony Marsh and Mike Benner. They were there. And Bill O'Brien, of course, and Bob Farrer. Bob Farrer went on his way. Then after the Christmas, I went down to Harwich for my training course and did a month down there with Frank Moore, and I was there with Nick Busby, Tony Dawson, and another chappie, Ray Drower, I think his name was, something like that, but he left very soon after basic training. So we did a month there. Then, lucky us, we went for a month at Blackwall, because the Blackwall school was just opening up. So we spent a month at Blackwall, getting genned up on...
So you were trained twice?
Twice, 2 months training, yes. With Bill Bailey and Frank Woolston. And yeah, that was pretty good. I'm trying to think who else was there. No, that was about it. And I quite enjoyed the trips out to AGA's place, you know, the Lighthouse equipment makers, going out there, and obviously we did our little safety harness jump down inside the tower at Blackwall and trips like that. So that was quite an interesting phase of it, even though it was in the winter. It was that winter 72 we're into now, so the power strikes were on, and in that Seaman's Mission place it was a bit dark and gloomy in there of a night time with no power on, and cold as well, yeah. So more or less right at the end of training they said to me, okay, we've got an appointment for you, you're off to St Mary's at Whitley Bay. And that was a part of the country I hadn't been to before. So I get the train up there, and they said, you're going to have to watch it getting out there because of the tide coming and going. There's only certain states of the tide you can get out. Anyway, it worked out. I was lucky and I was able to get out to the lighthouse. And there was Les Pine and Dick Matthews. They were the two keepers there. Oh, and Malcolm Smith Goslin was somewhere. Oh, he'd been there the week before, Malcolm Smith Goslin. And he came over to St Mary's a day or so later, just called in for a chat and such like. So that was my first lighthouse. Here I was installed at St Mary's Whitley Bay. And I'm going to take a break now and bounce it back to you, Peter.
What was St Mary's like?
It was, as I say, middle of winter, so it was a bit cold and grim, and but it suited me fine. I had my own little room there, and I was a bit apprehensive about this IOBs, you know, the oil burners. Went through even though we'd done that in basic training at Harwich, just a bit jittery when you're doing it for real on watch. So lovely big lens up there, and I remember going through all this performance of preheating and pumping up the pressure in the tanks and lighting up, and it didn't go too badly at all, yeah. And you kept your watches in the service room just below the lantern, and it did have a wind-up clock for operating the mechanism to keep the mechanism rotating. And so I sat in there quite comfortably, actually, with the light hissing away up top, and you could take a book up or whatever, and it was quite a peaceful way to pass the night. The only other people round about, I always remember, were the fishermen out on the rocks down below, and I thought, God, I'd rather be in here nice and warm rather than standing out on the rocks trying to catch fish out there. So I was there, I think I was there for maybe about, I don't know, about 2 weeks, 3 weeks possibly. And I did do a day trip over to Suter Point and had a look at Suter Point. I remember meeting Russ Pape over at Suter Point and Malcolm Smith Gosling, because he was still stationed there then as a SAK. And and then after that I got a bit of leave ready for my next jaunt, which was off to the Longstone. So I went to the Longstone for a month with Maurice Bunting was the SAK, Maurice Bunting, and Frank Roach was the PK. And here we were offshore, and the Longstone, of course, is quite a well-known lighthouse, so that was quite a thrill for me to go out to that place, having heard about it before in the history books and everything. And then that's more or less coming on to spring, you see, as they're March, beginning of April, around that sort of time, and you could get out and about a bit. And I did enjoy it very much, the Longstone, yes, a good place. Came ashore from there, Willie Donaldson, on the boat. We landed on the Inner Farm. I remember I went up with Willie because he wanted to check something at the Inner Farm light there. So we went in and had a look inside the Inner Farm lighthouse and then proceeded ashore and straight into the pub. I mean, was it called the Ship? It evades me now. I think it's called the Ship, the local pub there, and we were sinking quite a few pints there. And then had to get up to Chathill rather rapidly for only a couple of trains a day stopped at Chathill. Just made it in time and trained to Newcastle. And Maurice Bunting, somehow he got hold of a bottle of Cornish mead up in Northumberland, and that bottle of Cornish mead was demolished by the time we got to Newcastle station. And there was a mechanic or coppersmith with it, I think Longstone was his name or something, and he'd certainly had a good skinful by the time we got to Newcastle, and we were wheeling them along on a station trolley. Anyway, I got my train off to Liverpool, and that was it. After that, of course, I was getting a bit of leave, and to me that was a great luxury to get a month's leave after doing this time off on the Longstone.
Right, the Longstone, it wasn't IOB at all, was it?
No, that's right. St Mary's had been IOB, and then when I went to Longstone, that was electric because they had Gardner engines in there, very ancient-looking switchboard. To me, it was something that reminiscent out of Frankenstein or something. All these breakers you had to bang up and so on. And I believe they left most of that equipment in right till the end, till it was demanned, I think, and automated. So that was it was cushy in that respect. On the wind-up there for rotating the lens, the clockwork wind-up, I seem to remember that was lasting for 4 hours, as opposed to a 1 hour wind-up, which a lot of them were. And there I was offshore, and you know, people talk about ghosts and things on lighthouses, and I haven't seen any ghosts myself, but I must admit I was a bit jittery when I was on the Longstone. Maybe it's because I was new to the job and it's the first time in such a strange place, but I used to be looking over my shoulder a bit going up the tower when I was going to go for a wind-up and such like, yeah. In case I bumped into Grace Darling, but I didn't have the good fortune to meet the lady. So that was it. Incidents out there, really, it was a nice tranquil sort of time we had. It was pretty good. Frank Roach kept us going. He worked to this old routine of out of bed at about 9 o'clock in the morning, was it 9:30, and turn 2, and then take a coffee break at 11 o'clock. So most of the time was spent talking anyway, but it was just the last knock into that old sort of tradition. I mean, you did cook for each other, of course, at that stage, because we're talking 1972, yeah, so it's still this joint catering arrangement that you had, which seemed to be very much the standard thing, which had been for years and years in lighthouses. Maurice Bunting, he was a good character. He'd been a baker in his time, so I remember him doing donuts and all sorts of things for us out there on the Longstone. And his other little party piece was, well, not party piece, but his occupation, leisure time pleasure, was going looking for sea urchins. Now this is March or April, and there's Maurice in his swimming cosy, and he's going in the North Sea, diving down on the rocks for these sea urchins, ripping them off and then cleaning them out, making ornaments out of them. And he must have got really frozen there. Of the wildlife, of course, there was the masses of the seals around and eider ducks, plenty of eider ducks there. And to me, it's a very pleasant time. I thoroughly enjoyed it, yeah. That was second station, and it was a good one. And after that, a month there, then I went up to St Bees, detailed to go to St Bees. I arrived there on the Saturday, bought me food and stuff in Whitehaven, went up to St Bees. As soon as I got there, met by Fred Rosewall, and he says, "Oh, we've just had a phone call for you." He says, you're not to be at St Bees at all, you're supposed to be down at Milford Haven because they want you on the Smalls. Because somebody had gone sick on the Smalls, I had to come ashore.
So that's the other end of the country.
Yeah, so I had to do a quick about turn all the way from Whitehaven back down to Milford Haven. I got there and I stayed on the boat, the MFV they used at Milford Docks, the Trinity launch. It was called I'll tell you in a minute anyway. Anyway, the Strathclyde it was called, yeah. So I was on that for about 3-4 days waiting to go out to the Smalls because of the bad weather. We were just stuck in the harbour there. So that enabled me to see around Milford Haven a little bit. And then when we did finally go out, it was quite a bouncy sort of day still. And we went via South Bishop, dropped some men off at South Bishop. And then we go plodding. I see this place on the distant horizon. And Don Smeaton says that's where we're heading for, the Smalls Lighthouse. So I wasn't feeling in the best of trim at this stage, but after all this rolling about. And he says then, when we get there, he says, we'll transfer to a rubber duck, and take you ashore on that. And I was rather dreading the thought of that. But in actual fact, the ride in the rubber inflatable was much more pleasant than being in the Strathclyde, because the boat at Strathclyde was rather heavy with top decking and stuff like that. So I got myself installed on the Smalls, and I was there with Bill Roberts and a chap called Cliff Nutley. I think I either did a fortnight with them, and then Cyril Jones came out with an AK by the name of Steve Morrow, who later transferred to the Scottish Lights. Well, not transferred, he did a short term with the police first, then went to the Scottish Lights. Well into the summer now, it's into June after this 6 weeks on there. So we had some very nice weather out there on the Smalls, and that was still our IOB at that time, Smalls. I am correct in saying. Yes, that's right, because there was two lights, of course. There was the one upstairs and then the sector light IOB as well, a smaller one. The fog jib, that had been discontinued. Yeah, I can't remember sounding for fog there with explosive. The jib was still in position, but it had been discontinued, from what I remember. So that was the place that was rather talked about, wasn't it, on the west coast, the Smalls, for anybody on Holyhead district. But I came through that all right, yeah. Good company out there with Cyril and Steve. Quite enjoyed that.
Can you describe what it was like inside?
Now, to me, going out there, well, at least having been in the Navy, I was used to confined spaces because I'd been on the likes of the Type 15 frigate, HMS Whirlwind, and that was very confined in there. The Stoker's mess deck there was, there's about 36 of us down there. So to be in a lighthouse, even though it is cramped in the bedroom with the bunks and everything, I found it not too bad at all, to tell you the truth. And the kitchen was quite cosy, of course, with the two windows, and now we're in the summer weather, we could have the windows open most of the time. And it was, of course, you had to heat the place up to do any cooking, because we're still cooking for each other, we're on this routine still. So it did get rather hot in there around midday when the people are doing their roast potatoes, mashed potatoes, two choice of veg and bangers day after day and such like. You'd work a bit of a sweat up there. But at least you could get out of the tower and have a bit of a walk about on the landing or go up on the gallery and things like that. So I didn't find it too bad. And we got through the 6 weeks all right. And they had started helicopter reliefs then, because it's the Bristow's helicopter took us out, or Wessex took us out. But to get us ashore, they had a Sea King, Bristow's Sea King. So it puts one wheel down on the pad on the rocks down below, and the steward type fella ushers us on board, and a luxury flight back home. Yeah, it was quite good. Smalls. After that, I went to the Skerries, which was very nice indeed. That was a contrast. I mean, all the room in the world out on the Skerries. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was with Andy Bluer, and I forget who else was there now. Never mind, I'll tell you in a bit. Yeah, and Skerries was quite good, yeah. But I think I'm getting a bit knackered now, so I'll stop again and you can ask me another question, Peter. Give me a breather.
Tell me all about gardening and stuff on the Skerries.
Gardening, they certainly had both the gardens under, the garden, should I say, under cultivation at that time. I nearly said both gardens because, of course, subsequently part of the garden went under a helipad when they built a proper helipad out there. But yes, it was quite a nice garden, quite orderly sort of garden. Potatoes, cabbages, all that sort of gear they grew out there. But also the keepers were very much involved in lobstering and things of that nature. There was a little shed full of lobster pots and so on. And I think, well, the opposite turn-off was Bob Collis, Bill Roddy, and I think the other keeper's name was Bill Strutton. I think I've got the name right. And this Bill Strutton was rather keen on diving. He'd taken to diving, and I think somewhere around this time he got involved with some shipwreck. I don't know if it was the Mary, because I don't know if that was discovered then. Anyway, he was involved with some diving jaunt. He had his gear on, his diving gear. He went down. He was coming up with a cannonball. And because he was coming up a bit slowly because of the weight of this cannonball, he let out some of the air into his wetsuit, as I hear the story, just to make him come to the surface a bit quicker. And then he dropped his cannonball in a panic. So he suddenly became very light and full of air. And I believe he shot up out the water like a Polaris missile and then lay flat on his back coughing up blood. So Captain Merritt, the superintendent at that time, he said, no more diving out on the Skerries, please, chaps, yeah. Oh, because he's the superintendent I had met when I first joined in the December. Captain Merritt was the superintendent at Holyhead Depot, and Mr. Lewis ushered me in to see him. Captain Merritt was looking out the window and he said, oh yes, good afternoon, Mr. Foulds. He says, do you get on with people? I said, oh yes, shouldn't be any problem at all. He says, right, I'll do, thank you. And off I went. That was my initial sort of introduction. So I was accepted, yeah. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the Skerries. Oh, Gordon Phillips, he was the other keeper out there with me. Gordon Phillips, yeah.
Did the keeper do the diving with his coughing up blood survive it then?
Oh, he did, yeah. Bill Strutton, yeah. He did leave Trinity House soon after that time and went on to other things, yeah. So I did a fortnight out there that time. Then I went down to Skokholm and I was there with Bob Ratty and Mike O'Sullivan on Skokholm. Now, Skokholm to me was a wonderful little place. Yes, I did like that island. Bob was he ran a very tight ship, you know, everything ship shape, scuttles, and all his nautical previous life was still very much a strong factor in the way his day-to-day living. And the midday meal there certainly was a big ritual, because you did start preparing your veg and such like about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you had a proper cooked meal. And if Bob was chef of the day, every third day you see you'd be chef. So if Bob was chef of the day, he'd be laying on all sorts of delights like very, very strong curry. I remember that one day. Poor old Mike O'Sullivan burnt his throat out. And then Bob was also quite a talented lad at doing lemon meringues and things of that nature. So after your meal, and then you had a cup of coffee and they had a bit of a talk, and then into the kitchen and you wash up all your pots and pans, and then the cooker's stripped down every day and wire wool on the metalwork and such like. So you started cooking about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then the complete operation of the meal is finished by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So the morning watchman then, he supposedly goes off to his bed. But this did sort of rather grieve me, the idea of going to bed on a nice sunny afternoon. And here's Steve. Hello, Steve. We've got company. So must apologise for that break of transmission, but Steve Davis came in the room and he brought back this picture, which has been painted by Bill O'Brien, St Anthony's Lighthouse, and we just had a little chat there. Bill is keeping himself fully occupied in retirement, doing lots and lots of lighthouses. What a grand way to finish your career. Yeah. Anyway, we were talking about South Bishop. No, we've moved on to Skokholm Lighthouse. We're on to Skokholm Lighthouse, weren't we? And we've just had a big meal on Skokholm, cleaned all the cooker down, and in this lovely summer weather, the habit then was one man would go to bed, who'd ever been morning watchman, and the other two keepers would go walk about around the island. Yeah, all right, Chris, I think we can go walk about this afternoon. Don't need to be any phone calls, would say Bob Ratty. And off we'd go, exploring and scrambling around the rocks. And to me, this was absolutely idyllic, you know, because the whole reason I joined the job, I didn't have any grand ideas on I mean, I wanted to do the job, yes, serving the mariner and such like in that respect, but my own interests lay in other directions. That was just a means to an end. I'd travelled quite a bit of the world, been in the Navy, and I thought how nice to get around different places of Britain. And I thought, well, the lighthouses, that's a good way of doing it. Get out to some nice islands and spots here and there around the coast. I've always liked the coastal area. I do like sitting in the sunshine when you get nice summer weather. And once again, a lighthouse was an ideal location for those sorts of idle pastimes. And another thing, I'd got used to having quite a bit of leave when I was in the Navy. No way did I want to go back to a civilian life, a job of, say, getting 2 weeks holiday a year. That just was not good enough. So when I heard about the lighthouses doing 2 months on, 1 month off, I thought, that sounds pretty good. And also a job where you would have the opportunity to get on with hobbies and pastimes, something that was more a way of life than actual work. And I remember writing out a list of all these qualities and expectations I hoped to have in a job, and a lighthouse was the natural sort of conclusion of that. It's funny how things lurk in your subconscious, because I remember as a lad of about 13, 14, I used to get a magazine called RAF Flying Review, and it had an advert in the back page of that 1 month saying lighthouse keepers wanted. And even at that tender age I thought, oh, that's rather a nice job, I wouldn't mind doing that. And then it lay dormant for many years. I was at Faslane in the Navy, and I remember meeting a submariner from Australia came up, because the Australian submarines came up there a bit, and we got chatting about jobs and things. And this submariner, he mentioned a bloke he knew out in Tasmania, and this fellow was a lighthouse keeper, and he used to repair televisions and things in his spare time. And once again, that jogged my memory. I thought, yeah, lighthouse keeper's not bad at all. And soon after that, I went out in the Far East in the Navy, and I remember a particularly vicious night ashore in Penang. One night out on the tiles, and then we're getting the boat back to the ship, HMS Berryhead. We're getting the ship back, the motor launch back in the morning, and I look up from the jetty, and there's this chap inside the lighthouse at Fort Cornwallis, and the keeper's just putting the curtains up in the lantern. And I thought, what a nice steady job he's got. He's probably putting his curtains up, then he's just going to pot around the lighthouse. Nice quiet existence. Whereas I was churning over with a rotten hangover and all sorts of things. And then a few weeks after that, we were in Hong Kong. We came out from Hong Kong and passed a lighthouse there on a little island, and his fog signal was booming away. But once again, it cemented the idea a bit further in my head. I thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind being a lighthouse keeper. And in actual fact, while I was still out the Far East in the Navy, I wrote off to Trinity House and got all the bump and gear on it. So even 15 months before I left the Navy, I pretty well knew what I wanted to do. Anyway, we digress, because we were on Skokholm Island, so that was just a little bit in between. And Skokholm was very good, of course. It's fascinating, all the bird life out there, all these sheer waters and things clucking away in the middle of the night. And they used to come up and visit us. The bird people used to come up on a Thursday evening. Bob Ratty didn't want them coming in dribs and drabs, but the ordained day was Thursday evening. They could come up to the lighthouse and be given a conducted tour. Anything, so it didn't interfere with Bob Ratty's work up in the shipyard, because Bob used to have a steady production line going on ships in bottles, and a very nice job too. And in the 2 month turn off, Bob would make eight ships in bottles, in Dimplehaid bottles, and a pretty steady flow of orders coming in for it. And so I was rather sad to leave Skokholm, actually. After 2 months, I had thoroughly enjoyed it. It's very good. And now I think we'll take another little break, Peter, while you think of something to ask me. Or do you want me to say that I had my bicycle at St Anne's, jumped on my bicycle, and I went on a little tour around South Wales? Well, I mean, not much of South Wales, around the coast, explored around the coastline and such like, St David's Head, and then down to Swansea I went, along Pendine Sands and through Larne and places like that. So in other words, I found I could work this in between with the lighthouse work. It gave me plenty of time to go exploring around with me tents and such like when I was shoreside. Not a particularly ambitious project, but interesting, fresh territory. So after time on Skokholm, a bit of leave, and then the next place I went, I was sent off to Skerries again briefly. Well, we've been there before, so we won't go into that. although this time I was there with Bob Collis and Andy Bluer. And then I went to South Bishop with Ivor Pritchard, and the first night I was there was a very misty night, and at South Bishop they had these lamps that they used to shine onto the tower, because of course October we're in the migration time still for the birds, and it was quite horrendous that first night for the sheer quantity of birds that were bashing into the tower. The whole air was thick with these birds, just like I'd heard about in nature programmes and such like. And in the morning, of course, corpses all over the place, bird corpses everywhere. So these floodlights, I suppose it saved a lot of the birds, but there's the door just slammed again. Yeah, it was rather tragic, rather sad, all these birds got bumped off. Now, South Bishop itself, I did like that, because we're getting such a variety of lighthouses from places like the Smalls to Skerries, and then I've just thought of one I missed out, because I did go to Bardsey in the September. Yeah, Bardsey Island, and that was a delight, of course, because on Bardsey Island you had plenty of room to romp about. I think it was about 1.25 miles long, Bardsey Island, and the mountain on it, if we could call it a mountain, at 440 odd feet. And once again, if you did your watches, you see, you've gone through your sequence of watches, you got time off, and I used to thoroughly enjoy the middle watch anyway, because it was a nice peaceful time, no phone calls, no aggravation, and after a middle watch you could take to your bed for a bit, knowing that you're off the next day, and next day have your breakfast, hoping for fine weather, and then go walk about around the island. Or even if you're on a smaller, more restricted place, at least you could go scrambling around on the rocks, or a bit of bronzy and things of that nature. So Bardsey Island was certainly wide open spaces in comparison, and of course the very fact that you had people living on the island as well added to the appeal of the place, because Arthur and Jane Strick, they were on Bardsey at that time. We're now September 72, yeah, and they had a couple there as well, Yanis and I forget the lady's name, but they didn't stay there very long. And I do remember meeting Ernest Evans there, and Will Evans, of course, Ernest's dad, and Nellie, because they were over there just for the summer, and they were living in the schoolhouse. And I think Will used to do his lobster pots and such like around Bardsey. And even at that time, even they had sheep and livestock. Arthur and Jane had got organised in that direction. And
did you help out with the farming at all?
well, yeah, I do remember Jane coming down and asking for keepers to help out rounding up the sheep. Yeah, when they wanted to get the sheep in for dealing with them, sending them ashore and so on. So there was quite a bit of participation, interchange between the keepers and the islanders, which was a good thing, yeah. Because this is a thing I have noticed, that when I first joined the job, it was more of a community sort of attitude with keepers and with people they met. When the double manning came in 74 or so, I mean, I'm an insular sort of person myself, but I did find that a lot of cases people were more sort of individual and insular than they had been. There wasn't quite that same degree of mucking in together, because it was around 1974-75 the idea of cooking for each other was phasing out pretty rapidly. And that was, like it or not, that was a sort of social highlight of the day. It did sort of bind people together a bit when they were cooking for each other and such like. People, I think, did tend to become more insular after that. And also the television seemed to be getting a stronger hold from about 1974 onwards. And once people started getting busy on the old glued to the goggle box, tragically, I think that did kill off a lot of hobbies of people making mats and ships in bottles and things of this nature. Whereas in early days, the telly used to be on just for a limited amount of time for something special generally, rather than left on all day. So anyway, let's move on, because we've been to Bardsey now. Then I went to Skerries in October, was it? And then I went to South Bishop. That was October, South Bishop. Then I had a bit more leave. Then just before Christmas, I got marching orders to go to Coquet on the northeast coast. And Coquet I found to be a thoroughly fascinating place. I was there with Fred Jones, Fat Fred, and also I was there. I went there twice, so I think the first time I was there with Black Jack Hodgkinson, Black Jack, yeah, who had the name Black Jack because he had a great love of cleaning out mucky tanks or cleaning up muck generally. And marvellous storyteller, and I do hope, well, I wish you could track Black Jack down because by gum he could give you a few yarns, Peter, and he was a very entertaining sort of chap, but unfortunately left the job many years ago. And on Coquet, this is really going back in time again on Coquet, because on there it's an IOB light again, and a wind-up clock mechanism for the hood to come down over the light. So on a clockwork cam, this hood would come down over the mantle and stay down there till the cam came round, then it'd lift the hood up again to give the light its character. And then the low light, that comprised of 3 old wick oil lamps, argand lamps, quite big ones, great big parabola dishes behind them that you polished, highly polished parabola dishes, and the fuel reservoirs underneath the lamp, you top them up, they would last the whole night. And Coquet was a fascinating place, I thought, because it was built on the remains of an abbey, and then at sometime in the early 1800s, I believe, or maybe a bit earlier, it had been used as a fortress at one time. So there were the remains of the monastic part of it, the refectory that was now used as a coal store. And once again, we get back to this business of places that are a bit creepy, and I did have it did give me a bit of a funny feeling in the middle of the night there sometimes, because most of the time you used oil lamps there. There was very limited electric power because you had sets of batteries. They were for running the radio beacon, I seem to remember, or some other equipment, but you did use it for the living room. But every 3 days you had to run up the charging engine to have enough electricity in the batteries. And so to go to bed and such like, you had little oil lamps, which was all rather quaint and sweet and very Victorian sounding. And there goes the telephone. What a shame. Lights on, yeah. So we were talking about Coquet, yeah. These batteries providing the light. I've had a rethink there. I can't remember if we did have a radio beacon there or not. Anyway, the electric power is very limited from these batteries. And with the IOB navigation light, you had to pump up oil tanks to keep the pressure in it so the fuel would vaporise when it got up to the burner. So you had to pump them up to £70 per square inch, I seem to remember it was, at the end of each watch. And when you were down in the base of the tower in the early hours, pumping away at this tank in the gloom, once again you could start feeling a bit jittery and looking over your shoulder. And I never did like going in the coal store at night. I just didn't. I thought I won't push me luck by going in there in the dark shadows in there. So all right, big wimp, but there we go. I wasn't going to tempt Providence. So I was there for over the Christmas, and came ashore from there, and then really it was a matter of continuing that same circuit during my time as an SAK. In other words, Skerries and Bardsey, I went back there a second time, and Skokholm a second time. Then I went to Nash Point early in 1974, about February 1974. Tom Williams was there, and a keeper called Pete Bix. And I did about 3 weeks there, and then the double manning was coming up in March 74, and my first appointment was to Lundy North Lighthouse. And I was absolutely overjoyed at that because photos I'd seen of Lundy Island, that looked a lovely spot, just my idea of a bit of adventure and escapism. And I wasn't disappointed because Lundy North was a lovely lighthouse, yeah. So I was there with Terry Creswell, Pete Bix and myself, and the opposite turn was Jack Evans, John Cox, and I think Alan Burt was the other chap's name. And Reg Thomas subsequently, he came along there. But Lundy was a lovely spot, yeah. You're going to ask me a question, Peter.
Did you have much involvement with Lundy South? Well,
we did see them because Vince Pearce was on Lundy South with Richard Lambert and Keith Simmons. So we would call in over there from time to time, but Lundy North was an absolute treat for the likes of me, because at Lundy North, the engine started themselves up on a time switch, and the light put itself in. We had no RT set, and we no longer had any weather readings to do, Met readings, because that had been transferred to Lundy South. So I was in the right place for the glorious summer of 1976. And as I say, I didn't join Lighthouses to be strut around with Wolf Rock on me shirt and on me pullover and all that sort of thing. I wanted a nice little way of life, holiday by the seaside sort of setup. And the 2.5 years I was on Lundy, I just thoroughly enjoyed the off walkabouts, exploring around. That glorious summer of 76 I mentioned, that just went on and on. It was very nice to get back out there. Wonderful weather. There's just so much fascination in the island of Lundy, I thought. What with the old German aircraft wrecks there, the Heinkel that used to be on top of the island, and the different pathways through the rhododendron bushes and wildlife out there. Digging around, used to dig up some nice bits and pieces on the tips, nice old bottles and things like that, started on that sort of caper. And Lundy was a very nice routine to be working month on, month off on Lundy Island, suited me fine. And then of course we shut the place shut in October 1976. So the morning we closed down, the tender was to take us off, the Winston Churchill. Captain Carson's the superintendent came up to the lighthouse. Joe Deneen, carpenter, came with him, put locks on the doors, and we just left the place. Everything was left in there. It was fully stocked as if we were going to come back the next week. But no, that was the end of Lundy North, I'm afraid. And that, for me, that was an introduction to the decline of the lighthouses, how I could expect that over the coming years, that lighthouses would be dropping off one by one. And you're a bit like a hermit crab, you just scurry from one place to another. So for a while after coming ashore from Lundy, I was mobile. I did time at South Bishop again, and the Smalls, I went there, and a couple of other places. At Lundy South, I went there for a spell of duty as well. And then I got to Hartland Point also. And
is that when it had the full house attached?
Oh yes, the full dwellings were there, yes. Yeah. Kevin Wood was there at that time. Yeah, and that was a nice spot, Hartland Point. I did like it there. That was Easter 79. And then lucky old me, in end of May 79, I went off to Gibraltar and had 3.5 months in Gibraltar.
Tell us about
with Ron Ewins. Yeah, Gibraltar. Well, I had been there before in the Navy. I'd been there quite a few times in and out when we used to stop en route when I was on HMS Tenby. But to go out there to the lighthouse and have plenty of sunshine all the live long day, that was my idea of bliss. And it was a nice steady routine out there. I'm very much a creature of habit, you know. I like quiet lifestyle and everything nice and predictable. So that did suit me fine. I did enjoy that. I'm trying to think of any ways that it was different from life on a lighthouse back in the UK, but I mean, you had all the facilities nearby, the RAF NAFA, you could get your shopping there. I lived in the porter cabin, which was just inside the gate of the lighthouse. We weren't open to visitors, but as Ron said, if you wanted to take somebody up, you could. And the main thing you have to watch out for with your weather, of course, it could change so quickly. You get a nice westerly wind blowing in, and the weather's gorgeous, and then it can switch all of a sudden to an easterly, and you get the Levanta wind coming in and the mist with it. So you really did have to be on the ball, waiting for this Levanta wind to come up, bringing the mist, and then start up your fog signal and so on. But luckily, of course, there again, that wouldn't last generally for more than several hours, or maybe 24 hours, something like that. And then you'd be back to the westerlies, it'd be nice sunny, fresh weather again. So that was a very enjoyable time out there.
Did you have smuggling going on there?
Oh yes, there was, but not nearly to such an extent as it was latterly. Or maybe it's just they're more conspicuous, more blatant about it in later years. Once they got these high-powered speedboats I mean, it was very much a feature every night to hear these terrific things roaring past the lighthouse every night. But in '79, I wasn't quite so aware of it then, really. But no, it's a good life out there. And I've just thought what I've missed out in between. In between this, I did have an appointment to the Smalls because I went there in '77. About June '77, I went to the Smalls with Terry Creswell, Neil Hardgreaves, and Neil left after a while, so we had various keepers calling in then. Joe Peters, I did a month with Joe. I did a month with Bob Amlock, the famous Bob Williams, Bob Amlock, Robin Goch from Anglesey, and Bob Kett, he came out there as well. Although I'm getting slightly mixed up there because that was later. Bob Kett was out there with John Bell, yeah. Because I'd done a while on Smalls, a bit over a year, and then I got appointed to the Skerries, and I got out to the Skerries, Ivor Pritchard, John Mobbs, myself. I had a phone call from Holyhead Depot, and it was Cathy Williams. She said, "You're coming ashore tomorrow." I thought, oh my God, I thought somebody snuffed it. And she said, "You're going down to Swansea." I thought, what on earth have I done wrong? You know, I thought I was going to get a reprimand or something. She says, "You're going out to the Smalls Lighthouse." I thought, she must be joking. And what had transpired was that John Bell and Bob Kett had got sent out to the Smalls, and it's the first time they'd actually been out there, and some of the equipment on the Smalls was a bit confusing. For instance, the equipment for pumping up water from down in the winch room, the alleviator system as they called it, where you had to flick these, worked on compressed air, and you had to flick old massive valves across and levers and things, just for the sake of pumping 5 gallons of water up to the top, to the head of the tank. And also the operation of putting in the main light. I seem to remember there being about 13 switches you had to knock over just for putting the main light in. So it had all been a little bit baffling for them. So I was sent down to the Smalls again because I was familiar with the place. And I did in fact end up staying down there for about another 6 months, month on, month off. And then I had gone to Hartland Point, then to Gib, and when I came back from Gibraltar, then I took up my appointment on the Skerries. But first of all, in between that, I did a spell on South Stack just for about a week, and I went to Bardsey for a fortnight with Arthur Robertson. And on Bardsey, they'd had trouble with the water tanks. They'd got contamination in the water tanks, so we had to pump them up. What had happened was the lavatories, they had a backflash from the lavatories somehow. So there was all sorts of horrible things in the drinking water tanks. We had to pump them out. And of course, I was there with Arthur Robertson and John Cox. They couldn't fit down into the tanks, and Robbie wouldn't have gone down anyway, of course, being PK. So Muggins here was the one who went down, and Peter Williams came out and he fitted in the tanks as well, so we had a good old scrub out of the tanks, got them cleaned up. And around this time the opposite keeper was Fred Jones at Bardsey, I believe, yeah. Poor old Fred, he died not long after that, around that time, not long after, I think. And one story, Arthur Robertson was a great one. Robbie was a great one for telling stories, and he did tell this yarn about Fred Jones. So sorry, Fred Jones must have already popped off, because Robbie talked about this incident where he'd been cleaning out Fred Jones's room and burning a lot of the stuff that had been left behind, clothing and such like. Made a big bonfire in the yard, and he threw this jacket onto the pile of old books and bits and pieces. He was sauntering back to the lighthouse, walking away from the fire, and all of a sudden these bullets are bing, popping off in all directions, and it's a load of bullets that had been left in the jacket pocket, two bullets. And Arthur Robertson ran back to the lighthouse and he said, "My God, he's trying to get me from the grave!" But luckily none of the shots got him, so he's safely back inside. But he was a great man for stories with Arthur Robertson. It's a pity you're not going to be able to get him down on tape because he's unfortunately long gone. And so there we are, yeah. We're Skerries. I had a long run on the Skerries then, from November 89 till it went automatic in September 87, with various keepers, Bill O'Brien, Ivor Pritchard a lot of the time because I was on a split turn, Dennis Flintstone. Heffin Williams was on the opposite turn to me, and then Barry Hawkins was on the opposite turn to me, and Stan Booth, I was with Stan for a while, and Dermot Cronin was out there for a while, and then obviously we had many keepers passing through, Steve Davis and Paul Hickley, and numerous pool keepers and such like, just too many to list them now. But Skerries was very nice life indeed, yeah, for several years. Yeah, Peter, I think you want to size me up again.
So where did it go from there?
So after Skerries, when that went automatic in September 87, I was then on the pool, so I went to Flamborough first. Then after Flamborough, I went to Sark, that's another nice one. And I went to St Anne's, and I went to Flatholmes, and I went to Anvil Point, which I thoroughly enjoyed, that was my idea of fun. And then I went to Point Linus, which was absolute bliss, because the routine at Anvil Point and Point Linus was, there was 2 pool keepers there, and you only had to be on station at night from midnight till 6 in the morning. So during the day, you're free as a bird, you could go off walkabout, jump on your bicycle and go off and do whatever you wanted. Now in actual fact, we generally did work it, that we worked alternate days, so somebody was around the lighthouse just in case and such like. But to me that was absolute bliss. I mean, you couldn't get a better job than that. Here you are on holiday at the seaside. I mean, alright, it's a bit cramped in the quarters at Point Linus, but a very, very nice corner of the world. Had very good weather there. And I enjoyed going back there several times, and also Anvil Point. And as a pool keeper, to me that's what I wanted. You got less leave, but I always tried to get on land lights myself, and then you could explore the country round about. And I went to other places such as Alderney. I was on Alderney during that big hurricane, during the hurricane of October 87, October the 16th. I had just arrived at Alderney, handed over to Fred Bowen, he had the middle watch. I went to my bed, I heard the dustbin banging about, and within a matter of half an hour it was the full-blown shrieking gale. And for some reason at Alderney, there was all, up on the roof, were all thick pebbles and such like. And next day when I went up on the roof, all these pebbles, they'd been completely blown across to one side of the roof, as if a great wave had crashed in and shifted them. But Alderney was a lovely island, I enjoyed that. I mean, a couple of trips down to Alderney. And as pool keeper, I did cover several more places, such as Cromer. I went to Cromer. Yeah, met Graham at Cromer. And now I'm losing track. Royal Sovereign, I went there. And then Penlee. Bishop Rock with Ian Patterson, I was out there. And Mike Hall, he was out there. Good laugh with Mike. And then Peter Richards came out there. And what other places? I'd just like to cross off all these places while I'm about it. As a pool keeper, I also went to Trevose. Because my total number, I've been to about 31 different places altogether. Not counting Holyhead, because that's not a lighthouse sort of thing. I mean, total is about 31, And, okay, Pete, fire us another question.
Can you describe what Sark is like?
Yeah, well, to me, it's nice to go to Sark and Alderney, because you have got quite a contrast there. To me, I prefer Alderney myself, because it's sort of more open spaces, very good. I mean, they're both brilliant islands for going walkabout on, but to me, Sark was all a bit sort of insular, boxed in somehow, with all the little fields and the hedges and the lanes and things like this. Whereas on Alderney, it was good to just ramble over the area and exploring around the old fortifications, things of that nature, and absolutely wonderful the footpath down the east side of the island, or is it the west side? I'm getting mixed up already. It'd be the west side probably. Footpath all along the side of the island there, which was complete contrast to the harbour side of the island, which was all more built up with the roads and everything. I did like Alderney. Now, Sark, I thoroughly enjoyed it because I was in good company, as with Neville Peacock, amongst other people. And I thought it was a wonderful little island. Yes, it's just that tucked down low down the bottom of the cliffs there, halfway down the cliffside, you felt you're a bit more cut off from things. I mean, it's good fun. Yeah, it's great. A lovely island and handy for going. You can do your shopping out there. So much easier when you can go to a shop and get your food rather than have this business of having to victual yourself in for the month, which of course in the early days, I mean, we hear about keepers who used to go out and they used to cook the meat, didn't they, and put the fat on top of the meat, cook all the meat the first day, put the fat on top, and that would keep. And then when I joined, of course, we were still taught how to bake bread when we were down at Harwich. And when I was on the smalls, I did actually bake bread, but being a bit of a lazy tyke and that being rather a time-consuming occupation, I generally took, 4 or 6 loaves out with me. I'd hope to get some more loaves on the half turn if I was doing 2 months out on a place. And then, because these fridges weren't very reliable, the paraffin fridges, but once you got deep freezers into places, of course you didn't really need to bake bread then, because you could take out your 8 loaves or whatever, whop them in the deep freeze and it's no problem. And I used to, around those times, when I was on Skerries, I used to spend about £65 a month on food. And of course you had everything you needed, it came automatically. It'd be interesting how it would vary the prices these days, how much one would consume in a month. I haven't been offshore like that for a bit after to get a month's food in, so I'm a bit out of touch with that now.
Did you live off the sea or the land as well?
Well, here we are, you see. I mean, the old idea of a lighthouse keeper, people have got this image of a big airy character and he's wise in the ways of the sea and he's good with his rope work. I mean, we're taught splicing and all these things and everything. But I must admit, I've never absorbed it properly, and I'm there. I have regarded myself as a bit of a caretaker on lighthouses rather than a dedicated, really switched on kiddie. Follow the routine, go through all the basics and then expect to have time for your own hobbies and pastimes, which is just as important when you're out there in an isolated place to keep yourself fully occupied, I think. So my own interests have been a very important aspect to me. Therefore, my particular leisure time things, I've never made much of a success at fishing. I have tried it on odd occasions, but I just haven't got the knack for that or the patience. After half an hour, I'm getting a bit restless, you know. So I've never caught much more than a few mackerel and wrasse, things like that. Whereas other people who've put their minds to it, for instance, people on Skerries, Dennis Flintstone was very much into his lobstering, and he'd make up his pots and tend them every day, go around a couple of times a day and catching his bait and things like that. And that is terrific for anybody who can do that, and I just wish I had been able to apply myself to that. But my hobbies and pastimes, they took different directions. The first time I went out to the smalls, I took a load of army cat badges out with me, old mucky, grotty old things I'd picked up over the years, and I cleaned these up, got them in nice shape, and I did that in the first week, so for the remainder of my time I was twiddling my thumbs, and I vowed then, I thought, never again will I go out on a lighthouse without having some projects of my own to do. And the direction I happen to take, well, I've always, since joining the job, I've always been interested in photography and getting photos of these locations I've been to, because that's an aspect I totally neglected when I was in the Navy. So the minute I joined Trinity, I was very busy with the camera and built up quite a collection of that and kept albums together. And also I got into little hobbies that I found ideal for passing away the time while you're on watch, that weren't too absorbing. In other words, you can muck about with postcards and things like that, shuffling around and sorting out. And then the other thing that got me really bad when I was on Lundy, I was ashore one time and I got into this old boy's attic and he had some old Clockwork Railway engines up there that he hadn't been up there for 15 years, and this stuff was all over the place. There was masses of it, and I really got the bug for this stuff. I had quite a few of the bits off him, and some of it was in a terrible state, so I used to take it out to the lighthouse with me, and that light's winking at us now. Does that mean anything, Peter? Are we running out?
No.
Oh, we're not. Okay, sorry. I'll carry on. And I really got the bug for doing up these old clockwork trains. Some of them, as I say, they're very rusty on one side, and I cannibalised some of them, and where they were totally shattered. Kept the best examples, offloaded the dross, and from then on, whenever I was ashore, I'd be into attics, outhouses, junk shops, toy fairs, all sorts of things like that, feeding this obsession I had for old Clockwork Railway engines and generally old pre-war toys, lead figures, all that sort of thing. And I used to take a big box of them out with me every time to the lighthouse, to the lights of the smalls of the Skerries, and free time during the month, Instead of being glued to the box all the time, I'd like to go up in the lantern, say at the Smalls, or in the kitchen at the Skerries, and I'd be refurbishing these old clockwork railway engines and things. And I found it a totally absorbing hobby because I was coming into contact people shoreside. I was getting a bit of a buzz out of finding this stuff, and I was getting a lot of satisfaction out of restoring these things when I was out on the lighthouses. And that hobby, that did last for about 15 years or so actually. I had it really strong, yeah.
Now we're coming to the end of Trinity House. You're at Holyhead Depot, Water Control Centre. How long was it before you go out?
Well, I've been told my date's about December 97. So, here we are. I'm finishing at Holyhead in August this year, August 95. I'm supposedly going down to St Anne's. Now, I do have my doubts if we'll last as long as December 97. I mean, I'm inclined to think we'll all be shunted off down the road before then. But I count myself as being very lucky because here we are. I've had 20 odd years in the job, thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's a way of life that's gone. The lights are finishing, they're dropping like skittles now. So I've had my slice of the cake, and I just resign myself to the fact and ready for the outside world again. Which I won't be much good at doing any work, mind you, because I've spent 20 years in this job learning how to daydream, and I've got that off to a fine art. And now the prospect of facing the real world again and getting myself in gear, well, I think it's just too late in the day, to be quite honest. So I'll find a way to survive. I'll just keep pottering along. Well, I'm well over 50, so I'll get me pension anyway, a portion of pension. So at least that's a basis for starting my survival outside, and I'll just have to see how things unfold on that. Yeah, I've no great regret myself. That's the way things are. Pity that other people couldn't be coming along to enjoy this lifestyle. But there again, Trinity's not recruited keepers for quite some time now, so I think we have all had time to adjust to the idea really. And when I did join the job, I thought this job can't last forever. They'll make them automatic. I'm only very, very pleased that it's lasted as long as it has.
Right, thanks very much.